The door slammed shut behind me, echoing through the empty hallway. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Ethan's shoes were not the ones greeting me, but a pair I knew all too well. Vera's. "Alara, what in the world do you think you're doing, coming home this late?" Vera's voice sliced through the silence, sharp and accusing. I found my voice, though it trembled slightly. "Vera, I didn't expect you to be here." "It's not about me being here. It's about you neglecting your duties as a wife. Where have you been?" Her eyes bore into me, seeking to unravel any excuse I might offer. I clutched the book about Miami tighter, feeling the weight of her judgment. This wasn't just about tonight. This was about every silent battle, every unspoken grievance that had built up over months. "Ethan told me he wants a divorce," she continued, her words cutting deeper. "I can't say I blame him. You're hardly the wife we hoped for." I felt a cold resolve settle over me. This was not just a confrontation. It was a declaration of war. My marriage, my life, was slipping through my fingers, controlled by a woman who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. I had always been the quiet one, the one who avoided conflict. But as Vera's words echoed in my mind, something within me snapped. No more. I wouldn't be the silent, suffering wife anymore. "Vera, I work too, you know. I'm not just a housewife waiting for Ethan to come home," I said, my voice steady now. "You work? That little office job? You think that's an excuse? You should be here making this a home, not gallivanting around," she scoffed, her disdain palpable. Her words stung, but I stood my ground. "I have every right to live my life, Vera. I'm not just an extension of Ethan." Her lips curled into a sneer. "You're a disappointment, Alara. A real wife would put her husband and his family first." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. "I won this trip to Miami, Vera. I was planning to give it to my parents, but now—" Her eyes lit up with a mix of surprise and greed. "Miami? Well, that changes things. Ethan and I could use a holiday." The audacity of her words hit me like a physical blow. "It's not yours to take, Vera. I won it. It was for my parents." She stepped closer, her voice dripping with venom. "You're part of this family now, Alara. Your things are our things. And if Ethan wants to go to Miami with his mother, who are you to stop him?" I felt the anger rising in me, a burning flame fueled by months of her belittling and manipulation. "It's my prize, Vera. I decide what happens to it." Her laugh was cold and mocking. "We'll see about that, Alara. We'll see." She turned on her heel and left, leaving me standing alone, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and anger. I knew then that this was just the beginning. I had to fight back, not just for myself, but for the life I wanted, a life free from Vera's shadow. As I lay in bed that night, Ethan's snores a dull backdrop, my mind raced. Our marriage, once a hopeful union, now felt like a trap tightening around me with each passing day. The man beside me, once my partner, now seemed more like a stranger, a puppet dancing to his mother's tune. Morning came, and with it the usual routine. Ethan, always the early riser, was already at the breakfast table when I entered the kitchen. His eyes were glued to his phone, a frown creasing his forehead. "Good morning," I said, my voice neutral. He grunted in response, not looking up. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the silence between us heavy. Finally, he spoke, his eyes still on his phone. "Mom mentioned you want a trip to Miami." I nodded, bracing myself. "Yes, I was planning to give it to my parents." Ethan finally looked up, his expression a mix of annoyance and entitlement. "You should have discussed it with me first. Mom really wants to go." I clenched my fist, fighting the urge to lash out. "Ethan, it's my prize. I wanted to do something nice for my parents." He shrugged, dismissive. "Well, Mom's been feeling down lately, you know, since Dad passed. This trip could really cheer her up." I could feel the anger bubbling inside me. "And what about my parents? Don't they deserve a break?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You're being selfish, Alara. Family comes first." "Your family, you mean?" I shot back, my patience wearing thin. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're my wife, Alara. That makes my family your family." The finality in his voice was a clear message. In his eyes, I was an accessory, an addition to his life, not a partner. I was to fall in line, to play the part he and Vera had scripted for me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. At work, I found myself distracted, the image of Ethan's indifferent face haunting me. I felt trapped, caught in a web woven by Vera and tightened by Ethan. That evening, I returned home to find Vera in my kitchen, cooking. The smell of her stew filled the air, a stark reminder of her constant presence in our lives. "Alara, there you are. I thought I'd make dinner tonight. You must be tired from work," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. I forced a smile, my stomach churning. "That's very thoughtful of you, Vera," she hummed, stirring the pot. "Ethan told me about the Miami trip. It's a shame you won't be joining us." The casualness of her words was like a slap in the face. "I haven't decided yet, Vera." She turned, her eyes cold. "Oh, but you have, dear. Ethan and I will be going. It's settled." The room felt small, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to shout, to reclaim my life from this woman who had insidiously crept into every corner. But I held my tongue, my resolve hardening. Vera and Ethan might think they had won this round, but I was far from defeated. I would find a way to turn the tables, to expose their selfishness and manipulation. As I sat at the dinner table that night, picking at the stew Vera had made, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about a trip to Miami anymore. It was about taking back control, about fighting for my dignity, and I was ready for the battle. The following week was a tumultuous mix of silent dinners and whispered phone calls. Ethan had become increasingly distant, his allegiance clearly with Vera. The trip to Miami, my hard-won prize, now felt like a poisoned chalice. On a particularly dreary Thursday, I received a call from my mother. Her voice, usually so full of life, was tinged with disappointment. "Alara, dear, your father and I heard about the Miami trip. It's a shame we won't be going." Guilt gnawed at me. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really wanted you both to have it." She sighed. "It's all right, darling. We understand. Family must come first, as your husband says." The way she said family stung, a reminder of how Ethan and Vera had twisted the meaning of the word. That evening, as I entered the house, I found Ethan and Vera in the living room, poring over travel brochures. Their excitement was palpable, a stark contrast to the hollow feeling in my chest. "Alara, come look! We're planning our Miami trip," Ethan called out, his voice too cheerful. I approached reluctantly, the sight of them together like this sending a wave of nausea through me. Vera looked up, her eyes gleaming. "We're thinking of staying at this lovely beachfront hotel. Isn't it wonderful?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "It looks nice." Ethan glanced at me, then back at the brochure. "We should book soon. Don't want to miss out." Vera nodded in agreement, her smile widening. "Yes, let's. Alara, would you mind fetching us some tea?" The request, so casual yet so commanding, was the last straw. "Actually, I need to talk to you both about the trip." Their attention snapped to me, a flicker of wariness crossing Ethan's face. "The thing is," I began, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest, "the trip to Miami was supposed to be a gift for my parents. I won it, and I should decide how it's used." Ethan's expression hardened. "Alara, we've been through this. Mom needs this trip." Vera chimed in, her tone patronizing. "Dear, it's just a trip. Your parents will understand." Frustration boiled inside me. "No, you don't understand. This was something special for my parents. You can't just take it away." Ethan stood up, his demeanor shifting from cheerful to menacing. "You're being selfish and unreasonable, Alara. This is family we're talking about." "I am talking about my family." I shot back, my voice rising. Vera tutted, shaking her head. "Ethan, see what I mean? She's not family-oriented, not like us." I looked between them, my heart racing. "You know what? Take the trip, but this is not over." Turning on my heel, I stormed out of the room, their triumphant smirks burning in my memory. As I headed to our bedroom, a plan began to form in my mind. They wanted to play dirty? Well, two could play at that game. This trip to Miami would be a trip they'd never forget. A trip where karma would come calling, and I would be the one to deliver it. I spent the next few days in a state of cold fury, my mind racing with plans for revenge. Ethan and Vera, ensconced in their bubble of self-righteousness, seemed oblivious to the storm brewing. On Saturday morning, as I sipped my coffee, Ethan slid a brochure across the kitchen table. "We've booked the hotel in Miami. It's going to be fantastic." I looked at the glossy pictures of sun-kissed beaches and luxury suites, a bitter taste in my mouth. "I'm sure you'll enjoy it," I said flatly. Ethan frowned, picking up on my tone. "What's your problem, Alara? You should be happy for us." I stared at him, incredulous. "Happy? You're taking a trip meant for my parents, and you want me to be happy?" He leaned back, his expression one of exasperation. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. It's just a trip." "Just a trip?" I echoed, my voice rising. It was a gesture for my parents, Ethan, something special for them. And you and your mother just bulldozed over it. Ethan's patience snapped. Enough, Alara. You're acting like a child. You need to start thinking about what's best for this family. The word family echoed in my ears, twisted and corrupted by his and Vera's selfishness. And what about what's best for me? For my family? I countered. Ethan stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You're my wife, Alara. Your place is here with me and my mother. If you can't accept that, maybe we shouldn't be married. His words hung in the air, a threat and a challenge all at once. For a moment I felt a pang of fear, of uncertainty, but then a wave of clarity washed over me. Maybe you're right, Ethan, I said quietly, my decision made. Maybe we shouldn't. His eyes widened, taken aback by my response. What are you saying? I met his gaze, my resolve steeling. I'm saying that this marriage, this life, it's not what I want, not with you and Vera controlling every aspect of it. Ethan's face contorted with anger. You'll regret this, Alara. You think you can just walk away? From me? From this family? I stood, facing him squarely. I'm not walking away, Ethan. I'm taking back my life. He snorted, dismissive. We'll see how long you last without us. I turned away, my mind racing with plans and possibilities. The stage was set, the players in place. It was time for my revenge to unfold. As I packed a small bag, my thoughts were clear and focused. Ethan and Vera had pushed me to the edge, and now they would see just how far I was willing to go. This was no longer just about a trip to Miami. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my independence, and showing them that I was not to be underestimated. I left the house without a backward glance, the door closing behind me with a finality that felt like freedom. I moved back to my parents' house, each step feeling like a weight lifting off my shoulders. My parents, though surprised, supported my decision. In the sanctuary of my old room, I plotted my next move. A few days later, Ethan called. Alara, where are you? We need to talk about the Miami trip. I'm at my parents', I replied, my voice steady. And there's nothing to talk about. You've made your decision. He was silent for a moment. You can't just run away from this. We're married. Not for much longer, I said quietly. I'm filing for divorce, Ethan. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Divorce? You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I affirmed. Our marriage is over, Ethan. He sputtered in disbelief. You'll regret this. You think you can just leave me and get away with it? I smiled, a sense of empowerment surging through me. I'm not getting away with anything. I'm taking back my life. Ethan's voice turned cold. We'll see about that. And the Miami trip? You're ruining everything. I chuckled softly. Oh, Ethan, you have no idea. Enjoy your trip. The line went dead, and I sat back, a plan forming in my mind. Ethan and Vera thought they had won, but the game had just begun. The next day, I called the airline. I need to make a change to the reservation for the Miami trip. The agent was accommodating. Of course, Miss Alara, what changes would you like to make? I won't be going, I said. The tickets are non-transferable, correct? That's right, the agent confirmed. Good, I said, a smile playing on my lips. Keep it that way. The day of their departure arrived, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of anticipation. Ethan and Vera, unaware of the surprise awaiting them at the airport, were in for a rude awakening. I received a call from Ethan later that day, his voice frantic. Alara, what the hell did you do? They won't let us board. The tickets are void without you. I feigned innocence. Really? That's strange. I guess you should have read the fine print, Ethan. You did this on purpose, he accused. I shrugged, even though he couldn't see me. You took something that wasn't yours, Ethan. Actions have consequences. His voice was a mix of anger and desperation. This isn't over, Alara. You'll pay for this. I hung up, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. This was just the beginning of their downfall. Ethan and Vera had underestimated me, but they were about to learn just how costly that mistake was. As I sat back, a plan unfolding in my mind, I knew one thing for sure. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and I had just started cooking. After thwarting Ethan and Vera's Miami plans, I felt a sense of control returning to my life. But my thirst for justice was far from quenched. The real act of retribution was about to begin. A week passed, and I received a call from Ethan. His tone was a mix of anger and desperation. Alara, we need to talk. I'm coming over. I agreed, curiosity piqued. When he arrived, he was a shadow of his usual arrogant self. "Alara, I'm in trouble," he began, his eyes avoiding mine. I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of trouble?" He hesitated before confessing. "At work. They've started an investigation. They think I've been embezzling funds." I suppressed a smile. "Embezzling? That's serious, Ethan." He ran a hand through his hair, visibly stressed. "It's not just that. They're questioning my absences, my trips with Mom. They think it's all connected." I leaned back, the pieces falling into place. "Sounds like you've made quite a mess." He looked up, desperation in his eyes. "Alara, I need your help. You have to vouch for me. Tell them I was with you." I laughed, the sound bitter. "Why would I do that, Ethan, after everything?" He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please, Alara, I'm begging you. If I lose this job, I'm ruined." I stared at him, the man who had once been my world, now reduced to a groveling mess. "You should have thought about that before, Ethan. You made your bed. Now lie in it." As he left, his shoulders slumped. I knew the wheels of karma were turning. The following day, news of Ethan's dismissal and his embezzlement spread. Vera, once so proud and haughty, became the subject of whispers and judgmental glances in the neighborhood. Their fall from grace was swift and merciless. Ethan tried to reach out again, but I was done. My lawyer handled the divorce proceedings, ensuring I was well protected and compensated. As for Ethan, he was left to face the consequences of his actions alone. I visited my parents, sharing the news. "It's over," I told them. "The divorce is final." My mother hugged me, tears in her eyes. "You're strong, Alara. Stronger than you know." I nodded, a sense of peace settling over me. I had to be, Mom, for myself. In the end, Ethan and Vera reaped what they had sown. Their deceit and selfishness had been their undoing. As for me, I was free from their toxic grip, ready to start anew. The scars of the past would always be there, but they were a reminder of the battles I had faced and won. I was no longer the meek, compliant wife. I was Alara, a woman who had stood up for herself and emerged stronger. The day after my divorce was finalized marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. The shackles of my oppressive marriage were finally broken, and I could breathe again. Sitting in my parents' garden, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. The pain, the betrayal, and ultimately, the triumph over those who sought to control me. My mother joined me with 2 cups of tea. "What will you do now, Alara?" she asked gently. I took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through me. "I'm going to live, Mom, for myself this time." She smiled, a look of pride in her eyes. "You've grown so much, darling." Our conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. My father answered it, his voice rising in surprise. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" I stood, my heart pounding. Ethan stood at the door, a shadow of his former self. "Alara, I need to talk to you." I walked over, my resolve firm. "There's nothing left to say, Ethan." He looked desperate, his eyes pleading. "Please, Alara, I've lost everything. My job, my reputation. Even Mom won't talk to me. I need your help." I shook my head, incredulous. "You expect me to help you? After everything you've done?" He reached out, but I stepped back. "I'm sorry, Alara, I was wrong. Please give me another chance." Then I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved now broken and humbled. "It's too late, Ethan. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." He slumped, defeated. "I understand. I'm sorry, Alara. Truly." As he walked away, I felt a sense of closure. Ethan's downfall was his own doing. He had underestimated me and paid the price. Turning back to my parents, I smiled. "I think it's time for a new adventure." Weeks later, I found myself on a plane to Miami, the trip I had won all those months ago. This time it was on my terms. My parents sat beside me, their excitement contagious. As the plane soared above the clouds, I looked out the window, a sense of freedom washing over me. I had faced my battles and emerged victorious. Now it was time to enjoy the peace that came after the storm. Miami awaited, a symbol of my newfound independence and strength. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, to live a life filled with joy on my terms. Ethan and Vera were part of my past, a chapter closed and left behind. Ahead lay endless possibilities, a future where I was the author of my own story, and I was determined to make it a beautiful one.